In today's episode, we'll be focusing on the concept of pre exposure moments, those everyday situations where kids encounter sexual content or themes, even if it's not outright pornography. These can range from seeing an animal anatomy, to encountering suggestive ads or media, to observing physical affection between parents. While these moments may seem small, they provide a crucial opportunity for parents to shape their child's perspective on sexuality. By processing these pre exposure moments together, we can help kids develop a healthy, godly understanding of sex before they encounter more explicit content. So, join us as we explore practical strategies for identifying and navigating these pre exposure moments. With the right approach, we can empower our kids to face pornography exposure with wisdom and resilience. Let's get started.
Welcome to Fostering Godlike Sexuality at Home. Our goal here is to empower parents to teach their children to see sex in a godlike way.
My name is Brigham Elton. I'm a pornography and sexual addiction counselor who've helped thousands of people overcome even the appeal of pornography. And I'm hoping to get out in front of this and try to help parents to set up their homes to chase godlike sexuality from the beginning.
My name's Andrea, a mother of 4, and I'm learning alongside all you listeners. I'm excited to have these discussions. Thanks for joining us.
Over the next few episodes, we're hoping to talk about pornography exposure. What is pornography exposure? When is it happening? What can we do in a home to help our kids to make it through this moment of pornography exposure and still have a healthy perspective of sexuality?
Yeah, and how we as parents can think about those exposure moments, prepare ourselves for those,
Yes.
and be prepared to help follow up with what our kids will go through afterwards.
Totally. I love that.
I think it'd be awesome if you started with some statistics and information that you have as a professional about pornography exposure.
Yeah, so I think it's important to identify what is pornography exposure, because technically pornography is using media to get a sexual high, and so because it has a purpose, it's kind of hard to technically be exposed to it.
Okay.
But this is a self-reported exposure. This is when people are saying this is when I saw pornography for the first time. Now, pornography to them could be a naked image. It could be people actually having sex. It could be actually hitting a porn website. It could be seeing a bikini picture on Instagram. It could be a lot of things, but it's when someone is saying, this is when I was exposed.
And it's kind of like they're having an experience where they're feeling like pornography is coming at them, something that could be used to fuel a sexual experience.
And it's enough that their brain is getting the shock. It's amazing to me how every single person remembers their first exposure. They can describe it to me. They can describe me where they are most of the time. They can remember pretty much exactly what they saw, and I have clients who are my oldest client is 77 years old that I've had in the past couple of years. And he remembers the first time he was exposed to pornography at 15 or 16 years old, and so this is a moment that's having a little bit of a trauma, I would say small t trauma response, where it's just this it's a moment for them. Right. And so as we get to these self-reported pornography exposures, right? Back in 1998, we were looking at almost 15 years old. On average, that's kind of when kids were hitting it. There was obviously dial-up internet, where some kids could see it on dial-up internet, or it could be a magazine or something that got shown in the locker room at school was a common situation.
Okay.
That kind of thing, right? Then that number has dropped consistently as the internet has become more and more prevalent and screens have become part of our lives, right? And that dropped until about 2018, where it hit for boys about 8 years old, right? And it's stayed there, which is good. I mean, it's not great, they're 8, but it's stayed at about 8 years old for boys since then. Now, girls have fluctuated a little bit up and down, but they're usually around 9.5 years old is the average. We're talking average age of exposure, right? We're not talking it could
lowest.
Be as low as it could be as low as it's so young that kids aren't even it's not really landing for them. But this, we're saying on an average, this is kind of what we're looking at across the United States.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
Now this moment where your child is exposed to pornography matters, and it's helpful to try to delay that out, But the best thing you can do as a parent is to help prepare your child for that moment and how to handle it. So it becomes less of this like shock, oh no, what should I do?
Yeah.
And it's like shock, okay, oh, my mom and dad taught me to do this. Because that allows them to get to processing mode quicker. If it's shock, oh no, what should I do? That all of a sudden just increased how much weight that moment had on their life.
Because processing kind of shuts down, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
That fear shuts down processing,
Okay.
which when processing is shut down, that's when trauma really like increases. Yeah. Because like the longer you go without your processing being able to get booted up, kind of the more traumatic that moment can be for you.
Yeah.
Right. And so we as a parent have an excellent opportunity to prep our child for exposure.
Right.
Right. And today I want to talk about these, what I would call like a pre-exposure moments, because children are being exposed to sexual information before they have a moment that goes, whoa, for them.
That feels like a pornographic moment.
Exactly.
They're still getting sexual messages, having sexual moments with media or
like with an animal's penis or like there's like we're going to go through a bunch of these today.
Okay.
But like if we can help them learn how to handle those moments, then when they get to this moment that's bigger, they have like not only this like I know what to do, but this belief that like I can do it because they have handled a smaller moment.
Yeah.
Right. Let's try to list off like a few of these smaller moments. Like what are some of these moments that like you may see happening to a kid that they can prepare and practice for a bigger moment?
Well, you talked about like seeing an animal's genitals, right? I feel like that's a pretty common experience for like little toddlers, especially when they're learning about the difference between a boy's body and a girl's body.
Totally.
They're going to be looking for that in animals too.
Yeah.
And that's an awesome time, I think, for parents, for us to kind of start gauging our own comfort level. Are we okay with our kids exploring that, being curious about it, talking about it, and especially in front of others? Because sometimes as parents, that's when our processing kind of shuts down.
And then we can add to that fear.
Yeah,
right?
And then we add to that fear instead of creating what we really want is that godly view of sex.
Totally. And I think that animal genitalia one, like I've noticed that changed for my daughter. Like first it was just like a curiosity, oh, that's just a boy. But now that she knows about what sex is, right, and she's like had like the talk or whatever, like now those moments have a little more weight. And so like that pre-exposure moment mattered when she was 3. But now it's different that she's like coming up on 7 and she like knows the role of a penis.
Yeah.
Right. And so like that pre-exposure moments matters both. Right. I think similar with the baby's diaper. Right. Like what seeing a baby get changed means to a 3 and 4-year-old is a lot different than what it means to a 6 and 7 or an 8 and 9 or a 10 and 11 year old kid. Right. And so those pre-exposures, like with one type of moment, can be practiced a lot of times.
Absolutely.
Right. Let's hear a couple other
some other ones.
Situations that I see. I think like sometimes the beach can be one. Like recently there's been these like, I would call them semi-thong bikinis like that are becoming pretty popular. And we see those when we like go to Huntington Beach or when we go to the beach somewhere. And I think that that's a moment where we can prep for exposure. Another one.
Like mannequins at the store, right?
Yeah.
That maybe aren't clothed or whatever. I think they see this in like science books where they're learning about the body and they're seeing just kind of like a picture of a naked body.
Totally. I think another one is like breastfeeding. I think can be a pretty common one, you know, and like is breastfeeding like, oh, I shouldn't look.
Right.
You know, or is it like, just a big moment there. I think the parent's body is another moment, right? I think even like, I used to call them the skin girls, but I've recently learned they're called the mud flap girls, but it's like those silhouettes of this like sexy body that shows up on trucks or on, for some reason, mainly trucks. But like, like those are moments, especially like as you start to hit puberty, where a kid like something like that could still have a response that's like, oh, that's sexual. Yeah. You know?
And I think that kind of falls in line with like other ads or magazines or movies where it is a body that is trying to be, it's represented in a more sexual way. Totally. It's trying to pull at a person's sexuality.
Because it doesn't even always have to be like something that like is visually sexual. Like there is pre-exposure to like this emotional sexual energy, right? Where like all of a sudden that energy shifts. You know, like I remember first, like when I was a kid and Disney sneaks in their sexual jokes for parents, you know, and like I remember my dad laughing and being like, "Oh, that should that be funny to me? Like, why is that funny?"
Yeah.
You know, and even those moments are these like pre-exposure to like sex moments,
Yeah.
right?
Interesting.
And so as we talk about these moments and some and maybe some others today, like the goal is to try to teach a process for children of how they can handle this moment. Like I don't want to call it secondary, but it's like because it's a pretty equal goal, is to like help a parent. Like, how do I internally process these moments? Like, am I going like, oh no, cover my kid's eyes,
Yeah.
right? Which like, am I fueling this like fear of sexual information, right? Because like that fear can make this first exposure feel this like, oh my gosh, I have to be hidden.
Yeah. And I think you're totally right. I think as a parent, that is something that I am learning like matters so much more than me focusing on like, what is my kid thinking? What is my kid experiencing? Is for me to stop and check in, like, what am I thinking and feeling and experiencing? Because that, like, even just that frame of mind where I'm worrying, like, what is my kid thinking, experiencing, feeling is a fear-based mentality, right? And that's reflective of a little bit of like what my initial response is in those moments. And it's super important, I think, when we talk about preparing our kids for these pre-exposure moments is preparing us for their pre-exposure moments.
So like you have this a little bit, I have this a little bit. Like why do you think we as parents have this like fear response to sexual information?
That's such a good question. I think that there's a lot of things that go into it, but initially I'm just thinking it comes from this desire to protect, right?
Yeah.
Like we're wanting to protect our kids from something that we think is scary and
Sometimes
dangerous.
a little dangerous.
Right?
Yeah, sometimes that even travels to evil. Yeah.
And like so much sexual messaging has just been labeled as wrong, bad, dangerous,
Totally.
avoid. That for me, I've noticed that like really anything that has some sexual weight is a little bit like, oh, what do we do with this? Like,
yeah. It
I don't know where to put it.
Hesitant.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think like honestly, I inherited some of that from my parents. I inherited some of that from my church, which I still 100% believe in, but like still like can lead to some sexual fears. I think for me, like that was my primary skill. Like my primary skill with dealing with sexual education was to avoid it.
Yeah.
You know? And so I want parents to know that like I get where you're coming from. And like me, totally. I talk about sex at least 40 hours every week for like a decade. You know, and I still sometimes have this like, okay, I guess we've got to handle this, you know? And I think recognizing that as soon as you can go like, oh, I have this, your ability to like not just portray it increases. Even if you say it to your kid, like, I have this, then your ability to not portray it just increased by just like identifying. Yeah. And so that's going to be one of our main processes too, is like, how as a parent can I process this moment so that like I can help my kid process this moment in the way that we're hoping? Yeah. One of the primary skills we're hoping that parents learn here is to share their process, right? Like you don't need to be a teacher in this moment. Just like speak to your own process, right? Like if you see, like for us, we see our dog's penis get erect sometimes, you know? And like for me, just to go like, oh, that's Murphy's penis. Like sometimes it like surprises me to see it. Yeah. Right. Like I just shared my process and that's it. Like I don't need to teach. And I think this is especially true with young kids. Like one thing we've noticed, right, as we've talked about this back and forth, is that like the younger your kids are, the less like meaning sexual visual things have. Right. Right. Like my oldest child is 6. And so like for my 6-year-old, it has more meaning than it does for my 4-year-old, but it's still way less than like what it would mean to an 11-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 17-year-old or me. Like me, here I am at like 34 and like I see something sexual and it has way more meaning to me than it does to my 4-year-old. And so you naturally have this ramp, right? Where you can teach your kids how to process and they have less fear, shock, moment, right? And so the earlier you can start doing these moments and sharing your process, the easier, the more they'll be able to learn, because it doesn't have as much emotional weight.
Yeah. So they are like having these pre-exposure moments even young enough, like where you as a parent may be like, oh yeah, they don't see that the same way I see it. And our maybe tendency as parents might be to be like, so I don't need to say anything.
Yeah.
But it's such, like you said, a good opportunity for us to practice processing out loud
Yes.
in some small way that matters or is readable to them, right?
Totally.
And then they can process those things at that level. And then as they continue to grow in their sense of that sexual energy or sexual meaning, then they can continue that pattern of just
they
processing
have the skills already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And so like, let's go through a couple like examples, especially with like a younger kid that I would like be trying to hit. Right. Like we talked a little bit about breastfeeding. Like with my younger kids, like my kids who haven't had the talk yet, there's a little bit different where I will just say like, sometimes you can see them looking like, why does that person have a blanket over them? You know, like that's kind of like a lot of the times what I see, you know, or like, why is that person turned, or like, what is mom doing, you know?
Right.
And like, I like to say like, oh yeah, that woman's breastfeeding. Isn't that amazing? That's my process. I'm like, oh, when I see a mom breastfeeding, I'm like, oh man, that's just so freaking awesome.
That's so cool. And it's like more than just information about like what's happening, but what you feel about it.
Yeah.
And that's super powerful, especially when you're trying to counter this culture of fear or hypersexuality.
Totally. That is our process to share our process, right? Like you can say what's happening and how you feel.
Yeah.
This is what's happening. This is how I feel. That woman's breastfeeding. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. Like, or even like, oh yeah, that's Murphy's penis. Like that's kind of shocking for me.
Yeah.
You know, like that's just, that's a process. And that that skill, being able to say what it is and how you feel about it really helps a kid to then internally start to like less freak out about it. Like it no longer becomes like, moment. It's now just like, oh, this is what it is. This is how I feel. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Let's talk about some moments when we get to kind of an older kid.
Okay.
You know? And so like your kids are older, right? And like you shared with me once a story about a mannequin. Can you tell us about this like mannequin story?
Yeah, it was awesome. We were walking into like a sports clothing store and I had my two boys with me, 12 and 10. And right there at the entrance as we came in were two female mannequins that didn't have any clothes on them yet. Yeah. And immediately I went to like, what is my kid thinking or feeling? I'm wondering, like I have this sense of like needing to protect. Yeah. Because I feel like the privacy, right, has kind of just been a little bit invaded. Yeah. And I hear my kids kind of, this moment of like, what? That they're a little bit shocked
They're in some shock too. Because obviously like this has more meaning to them than it does to a 6-year-old. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so in that moment I just said, oh, look, looks like those mannequins don't have any clothes on.
Yeah. Stated what happened.
You stated what happened. Yeah. And then I was just like, I don't even remember if I had any like feeling attached to it, which I think is a skill that's maybe a level up skill for me to like continue to feel and grow. But it was awesome because my kids did. Like one of my kids was like, yeah, I don't really like that very much. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, the shoes are this direction. Yeah. And we'll go get the shoes, right?
Yeah. And you just opened up this like, let's process this together instead of like all have to like freak out on it on our own.
Yeah. And in fact, I think when he said that, like, I don't really like that very much, I think I did respond with like, it can be a little surprising when you weren't expecting it sort of a thing. Kind of trying to turn that fear into like just surprise.
Yeah. You were invaded. Yeah. You know, like we've talked about like nakedness is very personal. Yeah. You know, and like when we get this personal information shockingly, we can feel this like, whoa. You know, like that feels a little off sometimes. Yeah. You know?
And I really want to like grow in my ability to communicate with my kids that like that feeling you had of like, oh, I don't really like seeing that isn't because the body's bad, isn't because like seeing a body is bad. It's just simply because like your expectation of privacy and what's personal has kind of like that line has been crossed for you. Totally. And that's okay that you feel that way. And that nothing wrong happened.
Yeah, I love this. Like, we're going to hit this again in more depth, but like, I love that this kid said to me once that he like saw this like imagery that this woman was like not very clothed, you know? And he was like, like that feels like that's such a personal thing that's now been used to get my attention. Yeah. You know, and he honestly, he told me like, it feels like someone came to school and told this like crazy emotional story to get attention. Like he remembers this one time his friend would use this story about his other buddy getting hit by a drunk driver to get attention,
Oh, yeah.
And you could just feel that like he was using this personal moment that had so much weight in such a cheap way.
Yeah.
And I think we naturally can feel that with nakedness, like nakedness is such a personal thing, right? And like, it just gets used in a cheap way. I think we're like, ugh, this feels off.
Yeah.
And I think as you can explain that to a child, right? Especially an older child that can actually understand that, that they can realize why I'm feeling this, like, oh,
yeah,
this feels off.
Uh-huh.
Right.
They can kind of honor those feelings without also building a lot of shame or fear around the body.
Yeah. Which then can lead to this like struggle to connect with your body.
Like, I think kind of we go back to like a beach example. I think you kind of mentioned at the beginning, right? Like
these like thong bikini things.
Thong bikinis. People have very differing levels of what they want to share and what they want to keep private, what's personal and what's not. And I think that that's such a good way to explain it, that like everybody has a different comfort level of what they want to, how much of their body they want to share.
Totally.
And like help our kids to honor what feels comfortable to them.
Totally.
And process that.
Yeah. Like I honestly, like this is something that happens even to me sometimes, where I'll be like, especially when you get in a moment where you're kind of trapped, like, and you've shared one of these with me before, but like, you're like walking in like down a sidewalk or something and someone's in their thong bikini or whatever. And I'm like, I'm trapped behind this person.
Yeah.
Like, and like naturally my line of sight is like their buttocks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, okay. And like, for me, that's something like I even say to my wife that like, oh, like, I don't like that, like that is just like, I feel invaded by this woman's butt.
Yeah.
That's like, okay, good for her that she feels comfortable, but like, I don't like it.
I don't like it. Yeah.
And that's okay. I cannot like it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go up to her and be like, hey, I don't like that. Can you put something on?
Right. It's not like to shame somebody else and their choices.
Totally. But like, I love to speak out loud my process, right? I think it helps my wife feel safer with me. And I think to let my children see that,
I
think matters.
So cool.
Yeah. And again, like you speak your process and they're going to learn, like, kids are naturally mimickers, and as you learn to speak your process, they're naturally going to learn.
Yeah.
But
I think sometimes like I have this, like these moments too, like you're saying at the beach, like we had one of those when we were on vacation about a year ago. And it was like, I don't want to like divert too much. And like, I don't want to like pull attention away in like a weird, awkward way. And I also don't even know how to speak to my process because I feel like I'm still trying to learn how am I processing this, right? And that's kind of like a sign that I have opportunities to grow and to learn. And that as I allow myself that space to do that, then I can transfer that to my kids.
And I think like if you're at that stage where it's hard for you to emotionally speak to it, you can just say what exists.
Yeah.
Oh, like those people are showing a lot of their bum.
Yeah.
And that like, that's awesome.
Yep.
And like that just allows them time to process,
And gives them something to label what they're seeing too, if they don't know.
And like in that moment, like if I had a child who was like following the bums and was just like seeing them the whole time, like it's going to be hard for them to process that while they're looking at it.
Okay.
And so that might be a moment, this kind of happened with you in the mannequin, where it's like, okay, let's go back and look at the shoes, or that might be a moment where it's like, hey, let's give some space from this exposure to allow you space to think about it. And even that might be for me, where I might be like, hey, Charlotte, let's like adjust your shoes or whatever, right? And I'll like try to just like, okay, I'm moving from having this butt in my face, and now that allows me to go like, oh yeah, I didn't really like seeing that, and I can now with her share my process because it's easier for me to process it once I've removed the exposure.
That's such a good point. And I think that I like what you're saying is like removing it, not because the exposure itself was like this wrong thing, right?
Yeah.
But removing it so that you can then speak to it.
Yeah.
And give yourself some space.
Because it's hard.
So then, like as parents, that's something I can take back as like, okay, when I have those moments and I need some space to process, remove and then process and speak to it. Don't just remove.
Totally. Because sometimes our social, like even our social thing will go off that like, okay, if I'm this close, like these people are going to hear me, especially if I say the word butt, because that stands out to people's ears, But I'm like, oh yeah, that woman's showing a lot of her butt. Like that could really make that socially uncomfortable.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And like not everyone is comfortable with that social like friction.
Yeah.
You know?
Awkwardness. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like you could easily create space and then you can share your process.
Yeah. And I like this is something you told me too, like when we had a moment where we were watching a TV show and like the boy was like looking at magazines of like Sports Illustrated swimsuit, right?
Okay.
And we did not feel ready to like speak to that with our kid in the room. And then like when the exposure was over and like we processed that, we didn't come back to it soon enough, I don't think, you know? And I think that when you were talking to me about it, it was like, yeah, you've got like a week.
Yeah. Yeah. It obviously like the weight of the moment matters because you might only have an hour.
Yeah.
You know, but in a moment like that where it's pretty obvious, like, oh, what is that boy doing with those magazines? You know, and it's kind of confusing. You know, you with an older kid, I would say you have about a week. You know, and I would say older, I would say above 10. So like above 10-year-old kid, you have about a week to go back to that where they could actually like bring it up, actually finish processing it, and then get it down. I think as a parent, you can kind of feel that too, that like, oh, this kid is wondering what's going on here.
Yeah.
You know, and like, I think we're pretty like naturally in tune as parents to like, oh, my kid doesn't understand this, you know? And like, that is a moment that like, yeah, come back to, you know, be like, hey, you know what? I've been thinking about this. And again, I would just share my process. I've been thinking about that video where that boy was looking at those magazines, you know, and they were just like, and he was embarrassed by it or whatever. And I just like, honestly, it's been standing out to me, you know, and like, I just wanted like, this is how I thought about it, you know?
Yeah.
Like, like that, I'm sad for that boy that like he's using another person's like personal body to get a high.
Yeah.
You know? And like, that's it. There's my process. That's it. You know, like it doesn't need to be overly leaned into.
Yeah.
As processes are shared, then kids will start sharing theirs. This happened for you with the mannequin, right? Yeah. Like you were like, oh, like I like that those mannequins don't have any clothes. You just said what was there, right? And the kid, your boy goes, I don't like that. Yeah. You know? You told me about another one with an ad.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I was going to say actually on the way out from the store, I was really curious, like, are my boys going to look back again? Again, there's my fear of like, what are they thinking and doing with this? But one of them just walked out. The one that had spoken earlier and was like, I don't really like that. Then the
probably
other one
processed that fully and didn't need to go back.
Yeah. Then the other boy, the 10-year-old, he turned and looked again. And then he turned down and he was behind me when he did that. So I thought, is he like going to like hide that he looked? But he said, Mom, it looks like one of the mannequins has clothes now. Yeah. And I was like so relieved that like that processing happened. Like, and he felt like he was looking to reprocess and think about it and not because it was like this thing to hide that need to process.
What an amazing moment you just had with your kids, you know? Like, why do you think you were able to have that moment? Because like, I mean, I don't know, maybe you would have been capable of having it years ago, but like, I think that your processing has enabled you to succeed in those moments. Yeah. You know, can you speak to that?
Yep. And I think that is because like after sitting through your program and like hearing you talk and kind of seeing like, oh, whoa, there is so much more growth that I personally can make in this area of like seeing sex in God's way. Yeah. That like, it kind of ignites this like passion and excitement for like, how can I help my kids catch that vision earlier? Yeah. And like, when can I find moments? So even though like I'm speaking to like all of these moments that I might be missing or like doing a half job on, I think there's some encouragement in knowing like, oh, there's going to be plenty more moments to come. Yeah. Like I just keep going forward and looking for those opportunities.
And do what you can do, right? Like you did a great job in this mannequin moment of just saying, those mannequins don't have clothes on. Yeah. You know? And that enabled family processing, which the chances that those boys are going to be open with you about their exposure just increased dramatically. Yeah. Because they just learned like, this happens not only to my mom too, but also like they are safe. Yeah. You know, because we want to have like, if we're ever going to have like, oh yeah, all parents say this to me and I'm just like, okay, you've got to be fooling yourself. They're like, oh, I want my children to know they can come to me. And it's like, well, they aren't going to. So just like, great. They might even know that, but they aren't going to. Yeah. You know, but if you can do these moments where we're like, we're processing together, then when you actually talk to them about like what's going on in their life, they can go, oh, we can process this together.
They can say, this happened, or this is happening, or like.
And they feel so much safer.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's happened.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And that one of those same kids, like when we were driving down the highway and we saw a billboard and like a woman was like wrapped in a blanket and you could tell that she wasn't wearing any clothing and it was an ad for a blanket. My son,
Good thing she's not wearing clothing in this ad for a blanket.
I know. I didn't even see the billboard, but he said, Mom, I don't really like how they make it obvious that she's not wearing any clothing under that blanket.
Yeah.
And I could just speak to like, yeah, it is kind of sad that they use somebody's naked body as a way to like draw attention in an ad.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome, right? But you didn't even initiate this one.
No.
Like, here is your boy, which boys are even usually more secretive with their moms.
Yeah.
Sharing his process with you.
Yeah. So
right?
cool.
Which is a sign of this success of other moments stacking up, right? We've had all these processes together.
Yeah.
That now they feel safe enough to process out loud.
Yeah.
Right?
That even when like there are misses, that like that's fine because there's enough like wins and efforts forward.
Totally. Because your kids are having these like pre-exposure moments every day. Like every stinking day they're having these, you know, like sex is constantly being used to sell. The bodies are available all the time. And we use clothes. Most of us wear clothes that accentuate our like unique genitalia is the truth, you know? And so like these moments are everywhere. And as we as a parents can start hitting them semi-consistently, then our kids will start sharing their process, which will make it so much easier when we hit these actual exposure moments, right? Because this same pattern is what they're going to use.
Yep.
Okay, I think it's an important stage to go to when our kids are older to like actually teach them how to process.
So more than just like show them our processing and give them space to do their own processing, but actually like teach them what that process is.
Totally. So like a kid conceptually in their progression really shouldn't get there until about 8 years old where they can like third process a decision, like third eye a decision, I guess. Where
like
they're
step
backing, looking at if I choose this, this happens. If I choose this, this happens.
Yeah.
And it's hard for a kid to even like look back on, this happens with young kids too, where you're like, what happened? Like, what did you do? Why did you do that? What happened? And it's hard for them to like for me, if I have an experience, like even like playing a game of basketball, I can almost like pretend that I'm a camera on the wall and see what happened in this moment, right? Humans aren't really brain development wise aren't ready to do that until they're older. And so this is something I would be looking to do with like an older kid that started to show that they can like tell a story from third person, right? That they're in.
They can like follow a script.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Then I would be trying to like teach out loud, like this is how I process, right? And that teaching would be, I try to name what I see first. If I name what I see, then I can usually name how I feel about it.
So you're kind of talking about like how to process. You're pointing out to your kids like this is what I do in moments where I feel like, like I don't know what's happening, or I don't know what I'm seeing, pause. Or I feel strange inside. I don't know what to do with it.
Totally. For me, it's my wife is more of an emotional processor. And so she feels like she gets this like ball of emotions that's just like not really going anywhere.
Okay.
Like that's how she would describe her, like they're honestly are small T trauma moments, you know? I would describe them as like, I almost always have a thought train going.
Okay.
And when that thought train pauses, I'm like, oh, right. And that's when I'm like, okay, name what I see.
Yeah.
Right. And I would be teaching both of those to my kids because most humans are either mental processors first or emotional processors first. And it's not gender specific.
Yeah.
Right. Like it is pretty liquid in the way that people process things.
So is it kind of like when the two things can come together, then the processing moves forward. But when like, if you're like a mental and your train of thought stops, then, or if you're emotional and like you kind of just feel like you're stuck in this emotional cycle of some sort, then you know you need to go to
just name what you see.
Moving forward.
Yeah.
So when you say you name what you see, would you say an emotional processor names what they feel first? Like, I feel weird.
Yeah, either way would be great.
Okay. I don't like this.
Yeah. Sometimes what you see can be the easiest, like to name the stimulus for either person can be easier, right? Like I would assume that one of your boys is more of an emotional processor with saying like, I don't like that, you know, like, but that I don't like that actually was enabled by you saying, those mannequins aren't wearing any clothing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is important to teach this to our kids eventually.
Okay.
But I think sometimes we're like, oh, I need to teach them so they can do it. That's a bunch of bull hunky. That's not real.
Okay.
Like if you demonstrate it, your kid will be doing it way before you teach it to them. When you teach it to them, that's helpful because then they can get better at kickstarting their own processing instead of just like waiting for you to kick it off, even though they will be doing that anyway.
Yeah.
They'll just get better at it when they're conscious of it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we get to this like, oh, I'm stuck. What should I do?
Yeah.
And that happens to us as adults.
Well, I think you make a good point too that like if we only do the teaching them the process, teaching them how to process without showing them, they aren't going to process those moments very well.
No.
Like to go back and actually in a moment of freeze or a small T trauma, right? Like to actually be like, oh, I know what I'm supposed to do in these moments. Like the brain isn't there yet.
Totally.
Usually. But if they've had chances to practice with you or they've seen you practice those moments, then like I think that allows the flow of processing to kind of open up.
Totally. That's totally exactly true.
Okay. Cool.
Okay. I think we've done a really good job at like things that we see visually, right? I think it's important to also talk about like pre-exposure moments that are more emotional than it is visual.
Okay.
Right? I think these are really common in movies. I think is probably the starting point I would say for parents. Right?
Yeah.
Now, this starts when kids are young, right? Where there's this like, I don't know, Sleeping Beauty, right? And there's this like build up for this kiss.
Okay.
There's this like, is it going to happen? And it's magical and the music builds to it. And it's this like emotional build up, release, which is honestly kind of like an orgasm. It's this like buildup of tension and release. And for kids, they're having this like sexual, maybe a strong word, but they are having an almost sexual experience in this like buildup and then release. Right. And I think that's an important thing for us as a parent to practice teaching that exposure just as well. Right.
That's such a good point. Like I never would have seen those moments that way unless you explained it like that. And those are opportunities to teach it in a positive way without like feeling like you're having to fend against something that's dangerous or something that's you're trying to avoid.
Totally.
Exposure
right?
to.
And especially like on that level, like in this young kid kiss moment, you know, where it's just like, oh, like that moment seemed to mean a lot to them.
Yeah.
Or like, hey, they're kissing. That seemed to mean a lot to their relationship.
Yeah.
Like their
they
relationship.
were really looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or their relationship has kind of changed now.
Yeah.
Right? That like, that was, oh wow, they kissed and now their relationship has changed a little. Right? Or they've kissed and this is a celebration of their relationship.
So what you're saying is like the kids are seeing those moments. They're feeling something about those moments, but being able to speak to them now allows them to process
that and to place that and create values.
Yeah.
Right? Or at least know that these are the values of my parents.
Yeah.
You know?
Cool.
And that can be a very positive experience. It also could come in a less positive experience, right? Where it's like this sexual buildup, right? And maybe it's something that's now against my values that I still see, you know?
Yeah.
So like you're watching like a PG-13 rom-com, right? Okay. And it has this build up, kiss and then sex scene almost always. Usually the kiss and the sex scene are connected now, you know? Yeah. And so like you get to that moment and that is a great moment for me to be like, oh my gosh, like this, like their sexual experience seems a little early for me. Like maybe that's how you think about it, right? Or it's like, oh, I don't like that they're showing that personal moment to everyone.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, I'm wondering, that seemed like a big moment for them. I'm wondering how sex will change their relationship.
Yeah.
Right? But just like pointing it out and then how you feel about it can even help them process something that might be outside of your value system.
So like even like could you say something like it seems like that moment for them was a lot more about their physical passion and desires than it was about like where they really are in their relationship.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. Right. And I think it depends on what they're depicting. The awesome thing about using media to teach is you get to show your kids a bajillion different sexual relationships and then speak to what you believe is healthy, what you believe isn't. Because like you could have a hookup on like Friends or How I Met Your Mother or whatever, you know, and then you could have this like buildup of partnership and this like unity that may come from some other show that like is more what you believe in. And you have this excellent opportunity to point out what you believe and the power of what you believe by using media.
Cool.
I think it's scary when parents set a pattern of skipping sex scenes.
Yeah.
Right? Because these children and youth feel this emotional buildup, and then it's kind of like, it's gone. What happened to it? Oh, now they're a couple.
Yeah.
You know? And like, for me, if you're going to, in my opinion, if you don't agree with me, fine, do your own thing. This, like, if you're going to watch that show when you're home, don't skip it.
Yeah.
Speak to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Even to say, like, forever ago, I've told this story a bunch of different times, but like, this mom came to my class probably 8 years ago. And I talked to her about this show called Passengers. It's got Chris Pratt and the Hunger Games girl, but I don't remember her name, in it. And they like have this huge buildup, and then they have this sexual moment, you know?
Okay.
And we actually in the class watched the sex scene, and we talked about what was real, about what was depicted, and what was fake, right? And then this mom went home, watched it with her kids, and was like, did exactly what I taught her to do. This like, ugh, you know, like, that's not real. And the kids were like, what do you mean that's not real? And they're like, well, she's like, sex is an exchange of, like, they had sex, and sex is an exchange of fluids. Like, you don't sleep together naked afterwards. You would be so sticky. Like, it's such an awesome moment, but it's been romanticized in this movie, you know? Fast forward, like, probably 6 years later, I'm giving this training at
A university,
high school.
right?
Yeah,
okay.
It was at Wasatch High School.
Oh, okay.
And I'm there at Wasatch High School, and I'm teaching, and I teach this exact same principle. And I watch this girl in the audience go like, and like, honestly, just jaw drop, see me, you know? And it's awkward to have the porn guy come and talk to you after that in high school. But I went to this girl and I was like, what happened? You know?
Yeah.
And she was like, you give this training to my parents. And I came home and they watched this exact movie with us, and they pointed out these exact things. And now every time I watch a sex scene, my brain's like, that would be so sticky, you know? And it just like allowed her to actually process this moment, instead of being like, oh, it's this mysterious, magical unicorns and rainbows thing, right? But this parent sharing their process gave this kid so much safety to process things on their own, and then that kid stored that is an unrealistic sex expectation.
Yeah.
Which is such an awesome moment.
Yeah. Especially like the further and further they get into like experiencing exposure at different levels, and like being able to really need to tease out some of those negative perceptions of sex.
Yeah. Are there any other of these like emotional moments that are like maybe outside of movies that you could see that like could be help a kid process?
I like that because, we don't want all of our kids' sexual messaging just coming from media, right? So
Totally.
like, I'm trying to do more of like sending them my own messages from my own relationship
that
with
you're
my
seeing
husband.
from our family.
Yeah. So like, even if that's just like, hey, like, I want everybody to go to bed because I want to go cuddle with dad in bed.
Yeah.
Like, we're done for the night, and it's just us two. So good night.
Yeah.
Or like, I was telling my kids the other day, you know, we've got like teenagers, and so we're trying to kind of prep them for like, what is dating like, and what should the expectations be, and like, how should you treat a date, and what should you be thinking about somebody you take out, you know? And I was telling them, it was awesome that like when dad and I were dating, he would always go and get the car washed before he came and picked me up. And I knew that meant that I mattered, and that the time we spent together was important to him. Like he would go spend money on it and put energy and effort into it, and like wanted to make it nice for me. It was an expression of love.
Awesome. Like, date nights that's just an awesome opportunity to be like, this is what's happening. This is what it means to me, you know? And now your kid is starting to store, like, this is what my mom believes, you know, that like when dad washes the car, that speaks care, investment, importance to my mother.
Yeah.
And the chances of your kids washing the car when they go on dates just increased.
Yep.
You know? And there was just this awesome, like, let me share my process in one of these small moments.
Yeah, and in a positive one, right?
Totally.
Like we talked about some where like it might be kind of like shock and like a discomfort and stuff, but I love how you're showing like we also really need to emphasize the processing of like really positive things that we see.
Totally. Like for my kids, I think one of those for them right now is they can feel the different energy of a kiss when I leave my wife or when I come back and see my wife, because we kiss and greet and in depart.
Okay.
You know? And like that to me is a great positive one for me to just say to my daughter who's aware of it that like, I love coming home and kissing your mom.
Yeah.
I just missed her today. Yeah. Or like, I feel so safe with her. Or like, I'm going to miss her, you know? Or like, I just want to be with her. I don't want to go anywhere else today, you know? And I think that I am helping my daughter to process a kiss. Instead of just going like, oh, that's something my mom and dad does. She's now attaching meaning and value to a behavior.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
Which is
cool.
so important.
I love that. I have heard, I want to know kind of what you think about this or what you've seen in this area. I have heard like some men that will like feel like they're sending a lot of positive messages about sexuality when they kind of speak to the meaning behind things, but the meaning that they're sharing is often like, your mom's like so hot or so attractive to me. And like, there's a lot of just like physicality behind it.
Yeah.
What, like, do you see that in some
I don't want to
personalities
minimize
or
that.
approach? Yeah, like I think there's
important.
value there.
Yeah,
but
there's
I
value.
guess like in one instance, I know that like this family, one of the older daughters was just like, she is kind of like, oh, I don't want a boyfriend. Like, oh, I don't like that.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of feeling that there's,
I think for dads, like I would tell them to talk about what it means to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like maybe this kiss means like we're each other's. And like I'm here, I'm only yours and you're only mine, you know? Because I think when we say like what it means to me, it's a little bit less like, oh, I get to touch my wife.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like I think like we get beyond that. And if you need to sit and take some processing time, like do that and be prepared for like, this is what this means to me, you know? Because like, even like sometimes my wife and I will give each other a hug, and as I leave, I'll like give her a little tap on the bum, you know? And it's not this like, oh, it's not this sexual thing, you know? To me, that means just like, I like you, I'm into you, you know? And like, it's just this kind of like, it's kind of a little bit of a playful to it. Like, man, I just like you and you're the best, you know? And like, when my kids know that that's what it means to me, it's not going to be this like demeaning thing.
Yeah, this objectifying
you know?
act or.
Yeah, because I think women can feel when they are objectified and they no longer have that level of meaning, you know? Yeah. And I like very clearly want to teach to my daughter that our physical intimacy in my partnership with my wife is not at all turning her into an object. Yeah. In my head.
Right.
If she feels that way, that's her thing. But like it is not happening in my head.
Yeah. And you can do that by speaking what it means to you. I really like that. So even just like in my example with like, hey, everybody go to bed. I want to go cuddle in bed with dad. Like attaching more meaning to that. Like, because I just need to be close to him right now. Like
it helps us feel like a team. Like there are just so many like awesome phrasing that you can use. Yeah. You know, that even with like a hug, you know, like sometimes with a hug, I'm just like, you know what, when I hug your mom, I just feel this like, man, I'm with you. She's with me. I'm with her. My wins are her wins. Her losses are my losses. Like we are an us unit. Yeah. You know? And like that attachment of meaning matters so much. Now, I think we've labeled these as pre-exposure moments. I think it's obvious that these aren't just pre-exposure moments. Right. Right? Like it's very helpful if you can get to them previous to exposure, but these are life teaching moments where it's like, let's attach what's happening to what my values are. Okay. Like that is a skill that we're going to use with like how to think about sex. Like it's quite similar to this, right? But this like pre-exposure moments aren't just pre-exposure moments.
But we're calling them pre-exposure because they help process when exposure happens.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. And exposure isn't just a one-time thing. Sure, pornography exposure starts one time, you know, but exposure is going to happen forever. Right. You know, and as we can help them see us process it, their ability to process it will increase dramatically.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this discussion today. We hope it was valuable for you and your families. Our website, trueconnectionsrecovery.com, has a bunch of resources that you can access to get support from us.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways we're trying to help individuals, right? Whether it's through like individual recovery, like partner support, even like parental support, like how can I set my home up as a place for success? Yep.
We will be putting like technology management resources, other educational tools, or like workshops that might be up and coming in the area.
Just trying to provide ways for like families to feel supported, right? And so all of that you can find there on that website.
The more that this gets shared and like as you talk about it with others that you know, like the discussions kind of flow and we can all grow in this area together.
Yeah, we really succeed as a community.
Yep.
Thank you.